What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So a couple of weeks ago, there were a lot of talks online. People were recounting their times with Nintendo as contractors, and it didn't paint the company in the best light. Well, now it looks like a new report has been published going over the inner workings of Nintendo of America, and I wanted to go over that one here today. Also, we are going to be talking about the Sega Dreamcast, as its best known accessory, I would say, the VMU, could be making a bit of a return here soon. And we're also going to be talking about Halo Season 2. I got a chance to sit down and play it, and I wanted to give some of my thoughts. Guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. And we're going to start today with Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Legend of Zelda. Stick with me here for a second with this story because I saw it, I thought it was pretty funny, but this was posted up over on VGC, where they say, in a video posted to Twitter from an upcoming episode of the Broken Skull Sessions on the BotW Network, Stone Cold and guest Cody Rhodes answer rapid-fire questions when asked Best Zelda Game. Cody, who is a huge fan of video games, responds Ocarina of Time hands down. To this, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who despite appearing in dozens of video games, is not known to play them, responds, "No, dude, Breath of the Wild." That caught everyone off guard. Like, no one was expecting him to turn around and say, well, no, it's Breath of the Wild. That's the best one, which I guess does bring up the conversation, which game is better, specifically now, if you look back at them. Ocarina of Time, I think, had a bigger impact just on gaming. That was when we were making the transition to big 3D games on consoles. But looking at Breath of the Wild took the Zelda franchise completely different direction as a very, very good game, very ambitious title. And looking at the two of them next to each other now, yeah, I'd have to give the edge to Breath of the Wild. I think it is a better game than Ocarina of Time. But one thing's for sure, it was really impressive to see Stone Cold show up randomly and just stun thousands of people online at once. Also, there have been a lot of talks around game studio acquisitions, even publisher acquisitions at this point, with Microsoft throwing money at Activision Blizzard. The one that people keep bringing up, though, is Ubisoft. And it seems that Ubisoft is looking around, but not necessarily talking with maybe the big companies you would expect, like a Sony or Microsoft. We can see this posted up. This Seeking Alpha saying French video game publisher Ubisoft rose 10% on a report that the company's founding family is considering partnering with a private equity firm to acquire the company. The report comes after Bloomberg reported last month that Ubisoft is drawing buyout interest from suitors who are kicking the tires on the publisher of Assassin's Creed, Far Cry franchises. They do name Blackstone and KKR, but of course in that Bloomberg report that we went over, there were no serious negotiations, but now it kind of looks like Ubisoft is starting to move in that direction. And I'm sure a lot of this has to do with prior history of there being attempted hostile takeovers of Ubisoft from Vivendi, where they were just buying up stock all over the place. And Ubisoft had to do things like get Tencent involved with investing in the company to try to ward off Vivendi. But now we could see Ubisoft maybe pivot a bit and just look to partner with a private equity firm so that they don't have to worry about any of that going forward. I know it sounds like a bit of a more boring path there. People like the big flashy acquisitions of like Microsoft or Sony showing up and buying them. I don't know why either of them would buy Ubisoft, though. Microsoft, bit busy with Activision Blizzard. Sony, I don't see any benefit from them. They already get all the games. And the Bungie acquisition makes sense with Sony's live service ambitions here going forward. So yeah, the most likely outcome is probably the boring one of a private equity firm just partnering with Ubisoft. Oh, and just in case you forgot, Marvel's Midnight Suns is still slated to come out second half of 2022, and we could be seeing a release date get revealed here pretty soon because it's starting to get rated by different boards. And we can see this one, for example, out of Australia, Marvel's Midnight Suns. That classification date was on May 3rd. It's currently sitting with an M rating, but I do know region to region, the rating and classifications are a bit different. They do mention in-game purchases. I believe microtransactions have been brought up before with this title, but people were more concerned that it would affect gameplay, specifically because they revealed that gameplay to be like a full card system with battles, and people weren't very excited about that. In fact, that seemed to turn a lot of people off. Originally, we're going into it thinking, oh, this is going to be XCOM with Marvel characters, and that kind of turned into like Phantom Dusk almost with Phantom Dust with Marvel characters. But I guess we'll see it here soon with the release date. I'm kind of thinking maybe Summer Games Fest somewhere in there, and then we'll find out when it does release. Maybe in like a September or October. I think they wanted to spend some more time with it, and we'll see it later on in the fall. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo of America and this massive report detailing a lot of frustration from different contractors working within Nintendo. This we can see from IGN. Inside the growing discontent behind Nintendo's fun facade, this was a report from Kat Bailey and is very thorough, very detailed, and used many sources. Some former, I think some still working there, and of course they wanted to remain anonymous. That seems obvious, but what happened here is this report details a facility kind of near the Nintendo of America building, which is really nice. It's massive. I remember they did like a whole opening ceremony for it years and years ago, but there's like this warehouse near this facility. It's like within like a field's distance is what was described. And in there, you have a lot of the contractors that are working. And they seem to have full-time employees and contractors kind of divided up with these different badges, or there's like red or blue badge or something there. However, full-time employees seem to really like it at Nintendo of America. It's the contractors that are pretty frustrated with the whole situation here, specifically because they seem to have a lot of expectations placed on them, very similar to the full-time employees. And typically what happens is if you are a contractor, you will inevitably be able to work up to maybe being a full-time employee if, of course, you're doing a good job. If you're not, your contract will run up and they'll just not have another contract with you. Nintendo seems to be taking advantage of this situation here with contractors, where they will do that thing where after your contract runs up, they'll have you basically take off 2 months and then bring you back later on. And it's kind of like this contractor loophole thing. But to go a bit beyond that, they also appear to heavily micromanage the contractors. And how it works with contractors is you usually have a set task for them to accomplish, and you don't look over their shoulder the whole time. Whereas some are describing not being able to leave their desk without maybe being reprimanded or being noticed, as even like going to the bathroom. Take a look at this, for example. Not about the bureaucracy involved with being a contractor at NOA, describing how they would have to account for virtually every minute of their day on a timesheet, breeding paranoia about leaving their desk for even a minute, lest Microsoft Teams mark them as idle. At one point, tired and ill amid a strict schedule, they attempted a tried and true trick from The Simpsons, using a household item to depress the insert key to keep the idle message from appearing. Very similar to the bird, the water bird that Homer would use during his shift, where it would just kind of keep tipping down and pressing a button. And one of the biggest points of contention here is that there doesn't appear to be any kind of career path from being a contractor to eventually becoming a full-time employee and going to be good in like the nice building, have all the benefits. Nintendo seems to be hiring people as contractors and attempting to more or less use them as perma-temps or basically full-time employees without all the nice perks that come with it. But if you're someone who's like, well, it's not really my issue because it's like you can go work somewhere else, obviously. Well, that does seem to be something that's happening with turnover for contractors, but not full-time employees. And that is actually affecting some of their workflow, which in turn affects things like localizations, translations, marketing, and basically game releases in the West. Take a look at this here. This is a passage saying one source estimates that demand for localization writers and editors has nearly doubled over the past 3 years, particularly as Nintendo has forged its way into areas like the mobile space, but that there have reportedly been no full-time hires within Nintendo's localization team in that period. Instead, NOA has relied more and more on contractors known internally as associates, who make up nearly half the English localization staff. It has put a strain on not just contractors, but on full-time employees as well, with associates required to take a 2-month break between 11-month contracts. Project managers have to scramble to organize and reorganize workloads in order to account for the varying resources and bandwidth. Now, interestingly, some employees who spoke with IGN kind of pointed out a certain time period where a lot of this changed. They say NOA culture started to shift around 2015. It was a particularly tumultuous period in Nintendo's history, noted for the struggles of the Wii U and the sudden death of CEO Satoru Iwata. It was a sharp contrast to the opening of the new NOA headquarters just 5 years before, when the company was still enjoying the double success of the Nintendo DS and Nintendo Wii, two of the biggest bets in Nintendo history. And I'm sure the stress around the Wii U while everything was going on, and then the unfortunate passing of Satoru Iwata, all of that coming together, probably did have a pretty large shift when it comes to NCL, which is basically Nintendo's headquarters in Japan, and how they would handle basically full-time employment. That seems to be what a lot of people are looking at now. And it does appear to just affect the overall output of Nintendo of America with localization, and I would say the morale around contractors, which Nintendo seems to rely very, very heavily on in Nintendo of America. And a lot of these gaming companies do rely on contractors, but I checked in with a few, and what's being mentioned here in this report is not normal, like at all. So one thing that was talked about by one of the sources is Nintendo NCL, Nintendo Japan, sees Nintendo America as a marketing branch. That's what they are. They don't like sit down and develop games from the ground up necessarily. Like in Japan, they'll be working on Zelda, Mario, and all of this. But because it's a marketing branch and a lot of this stuff is getting out there, well, this would technically be marketing around Nintendo of America, and maybe NCL looks to change up some of their methods when it comes to approach with contractors and full-time employment. And that's really the best thing I can hope for, and a lot of us can, out of reports like these, which is great to see press doing this kind of work because it could actually bring about change at places like Nintendo of America. But there is a lot to this report. It'd be very difficult to go over in just one segment here, so I will leave a link down below in the sources so you can check it out. Next up, let's talk about the Sega Dreamcast and the accessory that I'm sure we all remember, that being the VMU, or the memory card with a screen. You'd put it in your controller, and depending on what's happening on the CRT TV at the time, you might have something cool happening, whether it's the logo for the game or like in Virtua Tennis, you would actually see the ball going back and forth between stick figures, or if you're playing NFL, you'd be able to call the plays there so that people can't see it on the TV. A lot of really cool, innovative ideas came from that system and Sega. Well, it looks like we could actually see a new VMU happen here soon. Take a look at this. This is called the VM2, and I saw this, I was just blown away that someone would do this, because I absolutely want this thing. Now, they go over several ideas and upgrades that they would make a reality with this. This is from Chris, who has worked on different things in the past for the Dreamcast, most notably the Dreamcon. That was a Bluetooth controller in 2016 for the system. But we can see, obviously, it has an LCD with a backlight that is a higher resolution rather than 48 by 32 from the original. It'd be 96 by 64. Has a micro SD card slot. So, I mean, you can then change the capacity to whatever you want. Maybe you want to have a bunch of those little mini games on there. You can do that, or just save games. Has an embedded high capacity battery, external charging, which is great because otherwise you'd rely on those little flat batteries and just hope they stay alive. PC connectivity, which is great. You can use micro USB to do that. And then memory management through a custom GUI that you'll have with your PC. Now, at this time, it's still in like the prototype phase. There are some images on the website as well as Dreamcast Junkyard showing it in action, stripped down from the shell itself, which they don't want to do it having it like 3D printed. They want to do injection mold so it feels as close to the original as possible. And yes, all the connectors that you would use apparently with the Dreamcast controller itself. What a world that would be, being able to put an order in for a brand new VMU, the VM2 for your Dreamcast. Now, it appears this will have to be campaign funded because, I mean, let's face it, this isn't something people are gonna show up to Walmart or Best Buy and be grabbing off the store shelf. It'll be more for enthusiasts like myself who really like the Dreamcast, or maybe want to look into it now and just get a brand new memory card to use with it. But certainly I'll be keeping an eye on this one. It sounds like they still have some work to do, and they'll let us know through updates on the website, which will be linked down below when the campaign's ready to get started. Next up, let's talk about that Square Enix Embracer Group deal once again. It's something that was pretty shocking to a lot of people to see Tomb Raider and several studios change hands from Square to Embracer Group for $300 million, but we're starting to get more and more information around this, and we can see this post up by David Gibson, who's a senior analyst at MST Financial, kind of talking about the deal, specifically though the different studios and projects, saying in a little under 2 years, they lost $200 million on 2 Marvel games, but it still looks like a low price given the optionality on probably 4 AAA titles coming though, and that's impressive stuff for Square to be able to lose $200 million on the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, you look at the Avengers, you make a video game around that correctly, you figure it's going to make a bunch of money. That was a live service game, and now that I'm hearing they lost $200 million on that, along with Guardians of the Galaxy. But like something tells me the Avenger was much more expensive to make. I questioned the deal they had with Disney and how much money they were paying out there for the licensing, because that's wild stuff. Because the Avengers still sold and they were still making money through microtransactions. They still lost minimum $100 million. I'm sure David Gibson is estimating a bit here, but let's just say low end $100 million, losing that kind of capital on the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy, they said, did not live up to expectations, but I think the sales of that game, which is a very good game, by the way, was hurt by the Avengers because of how poorly that was done. They seem to want to make this Avengers game, and then halfway through, they decided it's got to be like a Destiny-style game, and it didn't work out. So, yeah, if you hear those numbers, they actually lost $200 million. They still have large expenses with 1,100 employees in the different studios, and they're not going to really do much with some of these IPs that are better known in the West. Yeah, $300 million in cash, great, we'll do that. It is really funny, though, because they mention NFT, blockchain, and stuff. And it was funny to joke about how, all of a sudden Square cares more for, crypto and blockchain technology over Tomb Raider. But I think some places took it a bit more seriously, like Kotaku, as an example, who seems to notice that the NFT market is collapsing a bit, saying just as Square Enix sells Tomb Raider to bet big on blockchain. Guys, they threw that stuff in there to appease investors. Square has over $1.1 billion in cash on hand right now. They didn't need the $300 million to invest in blockchain if they really want to invest in blockchain. They just wanted to get rid of a lot of these Western studios and IPs that have been costing them money over the last, decade now? That's the real reason why. The blockchain and stuff, that's more or less fluff pieces to try to soften the blow to investors, explaining why you basically just weren't able to make it work with these Marvel IPs, which, by the way, Embracer Group said in their conference call that they'll be taking on the licensing and IPs for Avengers and for Guardians of the Galaxy with those games specifically, as long as Disney approves it. So Embracer, if they really think they can turn this one around, they probably did pretty good for $300 million. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Halo Infinite's Season 2 that is now live. I got a chance to check this one out the other day, and the past couple of nights, I have been going back to Halo Infinite in preparation for Season 2. After it dropped, I picked up the Battle Pass, and I jumped into some of the playlists just to see what's going on here. Last Spartan Standing, I checked it out, and I played a couple of rounds and I was sort of ready to move on from it, which is unfortunate because they have the event going on and they want you to play Last Spartan Standing. Something people noticed though immediately when it launched is that the challenges weren't filling. They resolved that after a couple of hours. I just kind of chalked that up to just launch time issues and them having to work out a quick bug fix or something there. But we had 2 new maps that released. One is like a big team battle map called Breaker. That's like this desert area style map, and I believe that's what we were playing Last Spartan Standing on. And the other one is Catalyst. I really like Catalyst. It actually kind of feels like a game out of Halo 3, and I think it's inspired by a map from Halo 3, but it feels very much like a Halo arena style map, which I'm very happy about that. If we get more maps similar to Catalyst with that same feel, I think they'll set themselves up well. It's just seemingly going to take years to get that done at this rate. So the maps I'm at least okay with. Last Spartan Standing, you basically level up as you take people out. I won a bunch of the matches and I don't know, it didn't really do much for me. You level up as you go, you get better weapons, you'll end with the BR and the shotgun, and it's basically just eliminate everyone and be the last Spartan standing. But afterwards, I checked out King of the Hill. I don't really like the King of the Hill setup. You have these bars that fill up and then you get a point. I just like the old school King of the Hill where you held the point and it ticked up with a number and that was it. It just added to your score. Maybe they wanted to change it up so it was a bit easier or you have the ability to come back rather than have to just stand on the spot for a couple of seconds if you're right up against it. Just, I guess, a point-based system for them made more sense with the competitive scene. And we should also be seeing land grab get added in the next couple of days. I did notice looking through the battle pass though, and it was also posted up here by James Shields, that Clippy is added to the game. Yes, Clippy from Microsoft Office. You know what? I saw this and I was going through the battle pass. There's just not a lot jumping out to me. Even the first one had some interesting stuff, and this one's just, I don't know, it's nothing great yet. I'm gonna keep looking through it and unlocking stuff as I go, but I love the idea of doing something like Clippy. it's just fun. It's different, right? And that's kind of what I want out of Halo Infinite now, that I'm seeing them kind of put out stuff that looks pretty generic for some of the armor pieces and all this. They need to get weird with this game. Call of Duty Vanguard did a crossover with Attack on Titan. Like, who saw that coming? Halo Infinite could do crossovers with all kinds of Microsoft IPs, and that'd be really cool. You could bring in Doomslayer. You could do some cool armor pieces from that, right? You could go off and grab the puzzle piece, the Jiggy from Banjo-Kazooie. Throw that in as like a little attachment and stuff there. Even just have different themes for your armor, whether it's different armor coatings or actual images or different parts of your armor from things outside of Halo, even the Microsoft bubble. Seriously, a lot of crossovers can happen, and that's kind of the direction I'd like to go, while they also look back with Halo lore and pull things from that. So it's still a long road for Halo Infinite. This update, not very substantial. Seriously, like you could probably see it all in a night if you play with some friends, and that'll be kind of it. The Battle Pass will take more time, but as for gameplay and the new maps, Catalyst is good. Breaker, okay, for last Spartan standing, I guess that's fine. But if they can come up with more maps like Catalyst and get more content out, they might have something in Halo Infinite. It just legitimately looks like it's going to be a plan that's going to take many, many years to get to. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, do you own a Sega Dreamcast? And, well, 19% of you said you own one, and at the very least it's put away. 15% said no, I did have one, but I sold it and got rid of it. And then just 67% have never owned one. I mean, it's not exactly a system that was around for very long, so I get that. But I do wonder if Sega looks at some of this stuff when it comes to their own market research and just goes, you know what, it's probably not worth making a Dreamcast Mini because it would cost them probably a fair amount of money to do it, and then they would have to charge upwards over $100, but I would still like to see Sega take a shot. I would certainly buy one even if it was over $100. I have a lot of nostalgia for that system, but that's what the purchase would really run on for a lot of people. And are there enough people that have nostalgia for the Dreamcast to make that worth it for Sega? And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Q Flat saying, don't get me wrong, I'm excited to see the Prince of Persia remake, great game. However, I'm pretty sure Ubisoft Montreal has a completely different staff than they did when they made the original. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't see why that would matter at all either. And you're probably right. I'm sure a lot of the staff that was there that made the original Sands of Time, like almost 2 decades ago now or whatever, they're not necessarily there, but this shift, and I think why people are seeing this as a possible good thing, is because Ubisoft may be taking the Prince of Persia series a bit more seriously at this time and be more interested in actually putting the money into that franchise to make a good remake. They could have just pushed this thing out the door after it got the reaction and the feedback that it did from fans, but they attempted to delay it. They attempted to delay it again, just hoping that the Ubisoft Pune and Mumbai would be able to get this game to a certain point. It doesn't seem like they were. So they said, well, we're going to hand it off to Ubisoft Montreal, who's created big franchises like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Watch Dogs. So I'm really curious to see what Sands of Time remake ends up looking like. It's just probably going to be a couple of years before we end up seeing it release. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Where's the report circulating around Nintendo of America and contractors within the company being frustrated? Then also, what about the Dreamcast? Potentially getting a brand new VMU, the VM2 here soon. And then what about Halo and Season 2? Did you get a chance to play it? And what do you think? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.